the epic battle between good and evil. This is what we have been discussing the last 2 weeks, and we've got 2 more after this in this series. And we are asking this question: how do we learn to discern the difference between what is good and what looks so good that is actually evil? Because the challenge that we face is that which is evil is a genius at disguising itself as good. And it takes much work to learn to discern the difference. Now, our scriptural base all the way through this has been Ephesians 6:10 through 18. Ephesians is a book that was written to a group of struggling Christians probably around 45-50 AD who have just formed this church and really do not know how to do it. And they have discovered in the process of forming church that they need direction. And so this letter was sent to them to teach them that they are God's people and that they have the privilege of walking with God, and that they need to learn to stand firm because there are forces against them. And so we're going to read this part about standing firm. And I'm going to encourage you all to stand as we read, knowing that you've been standing and sitting, but as I remind you weekly, the exercise is very good for you. If you would stand and read with me these words. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Put on the whole armor of God so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. Stand, therefore, and fasten the belt of truth around your waist, and put on the breastplate of righteousness. As shoes for your feet, put on whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. With all of these, take the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Pray in the Spirit at all times, in every prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert and always persevere in supplication for all the saints. This is the word of the Lord for the people of God. Thanks be to God. And you may be seated. Now, as you know, I have been using, or those of you that have been here the last couple of weeks, I've been using characters from Harry Potter series to illustrate this and to take us into the text. When we first began this, we started with the character of Tom Riddle. Tom, who had everything given to him, looks and intelligence and birth and heritage, is the one who morphed into, as the books call it, the one whose name must not be named and whose name we shall not call in here. He was no longer able to feel remorse, and that's what brought him down. This is what killed him. He engaged in evil deeds. He engaged in deeds that were wrong, and instead of feeling remorse, that's the British word for repentance, he continued in them to a point where he could no longer feel sorry for what he had done, and that was his demise. And then last week we looked at Albus Dumbledore. Now, Albus was a man who learned his limits, felt remorse, and gained wisdom. The first week's character, Tom Riddle, could easily be equated to the biblical Saul, the first king of Israel, and he had it all. But it wasn't enough for him. And he crossed over to evil to gain the world in a way that destroyed his soul. Dumbledore, this man of immense wisdom, in many ways could be the biblical Solomon, the one who had wisdom. But Dumbledore, what he did is he actually embraced it and lived out of it, whereas Solomon appeared not to be able to. It's important not to confuse Dumbledore with God. He's kind of the God character in the book, but he's not. He is a human person who learned his limits by actually having crossed over at one point into that which is evil. But he pulled back, and that made him a powerful force for good. Now today, we're going to look at Neville Longbottom and Hermione Granger, and these are two people with the odds stacked very much against them. And one of the reasons that I want us to spend some time on these characters is that I think that they are the ones that in many ways we can most identify with. So we're going to take a brief look at Hermione first, and I've kind of named her Little Miss Know-It-All. And if you've read the books or seen the movies, you know that what Hermione does is the only real asset she has is her brains. She's very smart and she's willing to study. Now, those of us who are still in school or who've been there, how fond were we of the person in our classrooms that when the teacher asked the question, immediately raised her hand and had all the right answers? She was not the favorite person, was she? I called her Little Miss Goody Two-Shoes. I don't know what the current term for it is, but we do not like this person very much. And Hermione really only had two friends, which were Harry Potter and his sidekick, Ron, because she really alienated other people. So we're going to just show this little brief scene about her so that you can see here. This is a scene that took place from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone when they had just come, three of them, Ron and Harry and Hermione, had come from this room where there's this three-headed, snarling, nasty dog, and they have barely been able to escape from this dog, and they're heading back to their dorm. And this is the interchange between three of them.
What do they think they're doing? Keeping a thing like that locked up in a school. You don't use your eyes, do you? Didn't you see what it was standing on? I wasn't looking at its feet. I was a bit preoccupied with its head. Or maybe you didn't notice. Don't drink.
It was standing on a cat door, which means it wasn't there by accident. It's guarding something.
Guarding something?
That's right. Now, if you two don't mind, I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed. Or worse, expelled.
She needs to sort out her priorities.
And I thought that was a real good introduction into Hermione. Notice that getting killed was not the worst thing that could happen to her. Getting expelled was the worst thing that could happen to her because the only thing she was good at was school. She had a lot of odds against her. She was what was called a muggle, for those of you who are fluent in Potter speak. A muggle was one who was born without wizard heritage, and so she was really on the outside. She just didn't have much going for her. Now, the other character, Neville, is very possibly... Oh, wait, I want to back up for a little bit about Hermione, because another thing that she had against her, just for those of you who know, is very curly, frizzy hair. I have a lot of identification with Hermione, just lots and lots and lots. But now let's go to Neville here. Now, Neville was one of those who should have been the star in wizard school, because he was a pureborn. He was one of those who had two sets of wizard parents. But he was right on the verge of being what was called a squib, which was the worst insult that could be labeled against anybody, because of what it meant was is that he had almost no talent at all. And so we're going to see this scene, also from the first book, of watching Neville learn how to fly.
Hello, Harry.
Now, once you've got hold of your broom, I want you to mount it. And grip it tight. You don't want to be sliding off the end. When I blow my whistle, I want each of you to kick off from the ground hard. Keep your broom steady. Hop up for a moment. Then lean forward slightly and touch back down. On my whistle, 3, 2... Mr. Longbottom.
His life. He really was an awkward soul. So we've got two people who really should be left out of this battle. They don't have what is capable. But the truth is that no one escapes the epic battle. And we must not walk into this without protection and preparation. I will tell you that where I see these two people, Hermione and Neville, is very much like Jesus' disciples. They're called to a task for which they were gloriously unequipped. They were uneducated, uncouth people who pretty well misunderstood everything Jesus said. And yet, they are the ones to whom was left the honor, if you want to call it that, of actually carrying the gospel forward. So as we're working on this, we've got to ask this question: what is really good, and how can we learn to recognize it? This is the major question. This is our quest during these few weeks, is to see if we can help discern what is the difference between the two. When I was doing some research on this, I was brought to mind an article that I read about a year and a half ago about a girl, she's about 12 or 13 years old, and who was born without the capacity to feel pain. Now, those of you who are parents, I want you to imagine what it would be like to raise a child who cannot feel physical pain. Among other things, when she was a baby, she would suffer from horrendous diaper rash because she was never able to communicate to her parents that she needed a diaper change. Most kids will be able to communicate that. But her diaper rash would be horrible, but she would never cry. She would never complain. At one point, she had a horrible abrasion on her eye that her doctors first diagnosed as pink eye. It turned out that she had lost a lot of her cornea. Nobody knows how it happened. And it was through that, after these misdiagnoses, that they finally found out what it is she has, is this congenital abnormality to feel pain. In the article itself, as we are engaged in the scene with this family, we see that this teenage girl is in the kitchen and she's cooking a pot of noodles because her parents want her to learn to live a normal life. So she's cooking this pot of noodles and the spoon falls into this boiling water and she reaches in and gets the spoon because she does not know. Okay? Pretty horrifying, isn't it? Now, I would tell you that that's where I think most of us start, is where she is, except we do not know how to discern between that which is good and that which is evil. We have to learn to do it in the same way that this mom and dad are working so hard with this little girl to teach her to recognize what happens with her body. And it's an unending battle. Even in the course of the interview, as they were talking, she had a headband on, which a lot of teenage girls use to keep their hair pulled back. And during the interview, the mother noticed that she was bleeding from the headband. It had cut into her scalp and she didn't even know about it. Now, that was a really good phone there, all right. I'm scared to that. That was a great moment because that's where we are. We're in this battle that we can't see against forces that we can't see that will take us down if we can't learn to do the discerning process and if we cannot teach it to our children. So how do we do this? Well, the way we learn to do this is by staying in the good, and that becomes our challenge. A few years ago, Malcolm Gladwell put out a great book. It's called Blink, and one of his first illustrations in there is about a sculpture that has been unearthed that the curator of the museum has indicated is a very ancient provenance and was worth a great deal of money. But when people who were very skilled in that particular area of art and history would come and look at it, several of them instinctively said, "This is not genuine. Something is wrong." They couldn't put their finger on why it was not genuine, but they knew that it wasn't. Something was just wrong. And in time, it was discovered to have been an extremely well done fake, but it wasn't fake. So how did these people know that it was not genuine? Because they had spent their lives with that which was genuine. So they knew that there was something off, although they could not pinpoint what was off. I've used this illustration before, but I will use it again because I think it's so important. That members of the people who are in the U.S. Treasury, whose job it is to identify counterfeit bills, and there's a lot of counterfeiting going on, particularly with the advancement in the printing industry. Those whose job it is to identify that which is counterfeit, as opposed to that which is real, do not spend their time examining counterfeit bills. They spend all of their training time only with the real thing. Intensely getting to know what a real, particularly $100 bill, because that's the most common counterfeit. It is how, what does a $100 bill look like, feel like, smell like? You know, what are all the tiny little markings on it? What's it supposed to do when you hold it up? What are all of the characteristics on it until they are so intimately knowledgeable about that $100 bill that when presented with a fake, they may not be able to say, well, this number is a little bit off, or there's a shadow where there shouldn't be, but they can say something's wrong. Because having known only the good, they are able to identify that which is not good. Is this making sense to you? Okay, so this becomes our challenge, is how do we identify that which is good and spend our time there so that we are instinctively aware when something is not good shows up. Now, as I was telling the kids in the second service, and again, let's see, I've already picked on Jessie here, who wants to be an actress, we know, and I've asked her how much practice is she willing to put in on this. And a couple of days a week of good, hard practice. But do you know how many hours it will take you to be good? Do you remember what we said? 10,000 hours of practice in order to be really good at what you do. That's what it takes. 10,000 hours of practice. So how do we raise our kids? How do we do this ourselves? Because that's what Hermione and Neville did. That's why they became so powerful in this book. They practiced probably 10,000 hours. Their skills. So that when it came down to the point that they were faced with evil, they were able to stand up and do what needed to be done. The thing that I so liked about Neville, this uncoordinated kid, so reminds me of me. Just not able to almost walk with 2 feet together. I mean, oh my gosh, that was my life. He practiced so hard defending against the dark arts. Now, that doesn't mean that he went into the dark. He practiced defending, which means staying in the light. That at the end of the last book, he's the one that actually slays the evil. Had it not been for this awkward, ill-equipped, wrongly called boy, evil would have won. It wasn't Harry. Harry did his job, but it was this kid. And they were guided through the process by Hermione's brains. Without her brains, they couldn't have done it. Both of them spent their time learning to be very good at what they do. Now, we're not going to be able to figure this out today. We're going to keep working on it the next couple of weeks, but as I told the other 2 services, chances are we're not going to be able to fully figure it out at the end of the next 2 weeks either. So if anybody wants to do a study on this later about how do we continue this discernment process, how do we determine that which is good and evil, I will be more than happy to begin a study with together as we work our way through this, because this is crucial. What's happened is that we get sucked into evil ever so easily, and our children do, and our grandchildren do, because we have not been able to teach them the difference. This does not mean being the goody two-shoes, which Hermione was at the beginning. She moved into something that was profoundly important because she practiced her craft and she stayed in the light. So did Neville. That's our job. Now next week, we're going to look at this really complicated character, Severus Snape. The question is he Judas or is he what? Because Severus had to live in the dark in order to do what he was called to do. And it's a very complicated role. And I just think that J.K. Rowling has done a spectacular job with him of helping us to understand what it is like to be in that kind of a role, because truth is many of us are, and how to maintain ourselves, how to maintain light when there is darkness and evil all around us. In my opinion, he is the most important character in this book. Again, even more so than Harry, because of what he does. So come next week, and we will continue to talk about this.